Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Dr. Ratima, on behalf of Dr. Lal Path Labs, invite you all on the webinar session on antenatal care, including elderly primigravidia and diagnosis involved. The antenatal period is an extremely important time during pregnancy. It is well organized that good antenatal care improves maternal, prenatal and neonatal outcomes. Most women will progress through pregnancy in an uncomplicated fashion and deliver a healthy infant with little medical interventions. However, a significant number will develop medical or fetal complications. What is the current challenge in antenatal care? To identify those women who would require specialist support while allowing uncomplicated pregnancy to proceed with minimal interference. The aim of antenatal care is to provide high quality information that can be easily understood in the current climate of ethnic and social diversity, provide an informed choice about the pathways of antenatal care, identify and screen for maternal complications, identify and screen for fetal complications, assess maternal and fetal well-being throughout the pregnancy, and lastly, provide advice and education on normal symptoms of pregnancy. To take this antenatal care forward, the most important factor remains the maternal age. Advancement in the lifestyle has also increased the maternal age. The advanced maternal age, which is more than 35 years according to the International Federation of Obstetricians and Gynaes, can cause complications like decreased fertility and high-risk pregnancy, including ectopic pregnancy, stillbirth, chromosomal abnormalities, uterine fibroids, low birth weight of the child, and spontaneous miscarriages. We have with us Dr. Indrani Ganguly, who would be enlightening us on the topic antenatal management of elderly primigravidia. In her presentation, she would take us through complications of advanced maternal age, the late pregnancy issues including various aneuploidies. She would also give us an elucidative algorithm for various diagnostic markers and their correlation with ultrasonography. Dr. Indrani Ganguly is a renowned consultant professor at GRI PMER. She is the chairman and head of the Department of Institute of Obstetricians and Gynecology at Sir Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi. Dr. Indrani is the vice president of FOGSI 2014 and governing council member of ICOG 2009 till date. She has been an executive member of various societies including ISO, PARB, AOGD and NARCHI. Colposcopy, oncology, endoscopic surgery, geriatric medicine and high-risk pregnancies are of special interest to us. I welcome Dr. Indrani Ganguly on stage to appraise us on this topic, antenatal management of elderly primigravidia.
माइक नहीं चल रहा है, कहाँ से कर रहा है? Hello. Thank you very much, Ritima, for the introduction. Today I am going to talk on antenatal management of elderly primigravida. She has given the synopsis that what I am going to talk on. Now, by definition, the term elderly primigravida is often used loosely in clinical practice. In 1958, the Council of International Federation of Obstetricians and Gynecologists adopted a definition specifying the age of 35 years or more. Then only you can label them as elderly primigravidas. The advanced maternal age signify age after 35 years, which I have already mentioned, at the time of delivery, and also it implies decreased fertility at this age, and automatically she is high-risk pregnancy. Now, ANC, that is the antenatal care, is very, very important. First promoted in the early 20th century, had generated constant debate as regards its frequency, content, continuity, quality, and the effectiveness in reducing maternal and neonatal morbidity and mortality. While special lecture on ANC above the age of 35 years, there are two reasons for that. First of all, with increased age, maternal and fetal mortality as well as the morbidity increases. Second, now we are getting more and more ladies in these age groups due to the late marriage, education, and they don't want to produce children so early, too busy with the career, and they want that ART, that is a artificial reproductive technology. More than 35 years automatically comes into the high risk group, so NC is also a special group of ladies. Antenatal care as we know it today emerged in the 1960s with the development of new technologies and redefined aim of preventing fetal death and congenital handicap. Probably the greatest success of ANC in recent years has been the introduction of screening and early detection of fetal abnormalities using biochemical markers and ultrasound. Aim of antenatal care is to ensure the well-being of the mother and child, which is self-evident. The objective can be subdivided into screening and prevention of maternal and fetal problems, management of maternal or fetal problems, and preparation of the couple for childbirth and childbearing. I have used the term couple here because in India, this concept is not there. This is the concept of the Western world. We only talk to the mother and the mother-in-law, but the father should also be equally responsible and counsel about what are the pros and cons and how he should look after the pregnant mother. Proportion of pregnant women aged 35 years and older varies from country to country, and both it depends upon the socioeconomical circumstances and the nature of the population of the elderly woman have changed with the time. Formerly, the pregnant woman more than 35 years and older tended to have several unplanned children, whereas the proportion of planned first birth in elderly pregnant ladies is growing down, which I have already explained. Because previously they didn't know what are the contraceptive modalities, they were going on producing children. The mother and the daughter, they were producing the children simultaneously, and she used to be the elderly, not only primate, but she used to be the elderly grand multipara. That is a different scenario altogether. I am from Sir Gangaram Hospital. The incidence is about 4%, that is of the elderly primary gravidas. Now, what are the risks of advanced age pregnancy? Spontaneous miscarriages, ectopic, stillbirth, chromosomal abnormalities, more chances of twins because the ART is more, uterine fibroids, and various medical disorders like hypertensive disorders, gestational diabetes. And if you come to the labor, they are usually have prolonged labor. They can have cephalopelvic disproportions, bleeding disorders, and low birth weight, IUGR, etc. And antepartum as well as the intrapartum fetal losses are more with the neonatal mortality and congenital malformations. Maternal age at conception is highly correlated with the risk of miscarriages, regardless of the parity or the number of previous miscarriages. It is assumed that the increased risk of spontaneous miscarriage among older women is a function of the age-related risk of chromosomal abnormalities. Approximately 40 to 60% of conceptions that abort first trimester are due to chromosomal abnormality. However, the relative risk of chromosomal normal miscarriages can also be there, which is the result of increase in age, possibly resulting in a decline in uterine function. Maternal age has no effect on the incidence of birth defects of unknown etiology. Advanced paternal age has little or no independent effect on the risk of autosomal trisomies when the effect of maternal age is taken into account. Now the first trimester complication. This is a study, the data from FASTER. This is first and second trimester evaluation of risk. This trial in which approximately 30,000 women between the age of 10 to 14 weeks gestation were enrolled in the prospective multicenter investigation of singleton pregnancies, which revealed increasing rates of both threatened abortion and miscarriages with advancing maternal age, published in British Obstetrics and Gynecology 2005. The FAST trial, which again included over 30,000 singleton pregnancies, I have mentioned that the congenital anomaly reporting were less than 35, it was 1.7, 35 to 39 years age, 2.8, and more than 40, it was 2.9%. Ectopic gestation, there were 8-fold increase in this study risk of pregnancy in women over the age of 35 years compared to the younger women. Congenital malformation common in older women are cardiac malformations, club foot, diaphragmatic hernia. These abnormalities are structural and usually unrelated to the aneuploidy. They are generally diagnosed in the second trimester by your ultrasound. Late pregnancy issues, women aged 35 or older are hospitalized twice the rate of antepartum than their younger counterparts, and common medical problems I have already mentioned, hypertension, diabetes mellitus, and of course with increased risk of perinatal and maternal mortality and morbidity. Hypertension, preeclampsia, there is twofold higher risk from the general population, 3 to 4%, more than 40 years, 5 to 10%, and more than 50 years, 35%. Diabetes mellitus increases 3 to 6-fold in women 40 years of age or older compared to the woman aged between 20 to 29 years. Pre-existing diabetes is associated with an increased risk of congenital anomalies, perinatal mortality, perinatal morbidity, and macrosomia. Abnormal placentation, abruptio and placenta previa occur more common in older women, 10-fold increase in placenta previa in nulliparous women 40 years of age or older compared to the woman aged between 20 to 29 years. Perinatal morbidity, low birth weight, that is the small baby, which is also known as SGA. Preterm birth, a Swedish study found 35 to 40 years singleton had a near 2-fold increased risk of preterm delivery, 1.7-fold increased risk of developing for small for gestational age compared to the woman aged between 20 to 24 years. Perinatal mortality, lethal congenital and chromosomal anomalies, non-anomalous fetal deaths, multiple gestations, unexplained fetal deaths after controlling for risk factors such as hypertension, diabetes, antepartum hemorrhage, and multiple gestation. Down syndrome, common is autosomal trisomy, 1 in 700 live born, usually the incidence, but incidence of 21 trisomy increases with age. At 33, it is 1 in 625, at 35, 1 in 348, and 40 years and above, 1 in 106. Screening of aneuploidy. Interest has developed in non-invasive tests that can precisely define an individual patient at risk of aneuploidy. Traditional second trimester screening with maternal serum markers of alpha fetoprotein, free beta HCG, unconjugated estriol was introduced by Waldchuckl in 1984. Inhibin was later added to triple test markers, making it quadruple. Although these approaches may improve detection rate, they cannot improve on the late gestational age at diagnosis and difficulties in termination of pregnancy if fetus is affected. So the test shifted to the first trimester screening. In 1992, Nicolaides and colleagues described increased NT, that is a nuchal translucency, at 11 to 14 weeks and increased risk of Down syndrome. Screening for aneuploidy, 11 to 14 weeks, you can do combined tests NT, HCG and PAPA. From 14 to 20 weeks of quadruple test, HCG, alpha fetoprotein and unconjugated estriol inhibin A, and from 11 to 14 weeks to 14 to 20 weeks integrated test, and which I am going to tell you in a minute's time. First versus second trimester screening for aneuploidy. The current American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists recommendation regarding screening for fetal aneuploidy is that women with single-term pregnancy who will be age 35 years or older at delivery, and women with twin pregnancies aged 33 years or older at delivery should be offered prenatal diagnostic test, and that all women should be offered screening. That means when you are doing screening, this is not diagnostic. For the high risk group, they are advocating they should go directly for the diagnostic modalities, which I am also going to tell you in a minute's time. Now, the detection of false positive rate of screening is very, very important. And the maternal age is, if you take the maternal age at a single factor, the detection rate is 30%. But if you have added maternal age, beta HCG and PAPA at 11 to 14 weeks, there is 63%. And you can see the right hand side, the false positive result is 5%. So when you are screening the ladies, you will have to tell them that they can also have false positive results. The red one, maternal age, fetal NT, nasal bone, and serum beta HCG, PAPA at 11 to 14 weeks, they have a detection rate of 97%. However, the false positive rate can also be 5%. Ultrasound for fetal defects or markers at 16 to 23 weeks, if you do only, then that is 75%. Coming to the ultrasound, what is the advantage of doing an ultrasound? First of all, you date the patient. Determination of dating is very, very important. Assessment of viability, identification of typing. If the patient is twin pregnancy, chorionicity is very, very important, which can be diagnosed in the early weeks only. Later on, if you see the patient, there the chorionicity cannot be that sensitive. Screening for fetal aneuploidy, this is very, very, very important. When we are doing the first trimester screening or the second trimester screening, the dating is very, very important, because all the software markers, what they do, you go for the ultrasound first, and then with the report, you go and have the biochemical markers. So dating is very, very important. And of course, in the 11 to 14 weeks, you see the nasal bone and the NT, that is a nuchal translucency. Dating of pregnancy is important, as in this age group, cycles are irregular. They are 40, they are perimenopause, 35, 40, because the menopausal changes, which are actually starts when the menopause are reached, but the perimenopausal ladies will have irregular cycles. So the elderly ladies, they are coming onto that age group. So dating of pregnancy by menstrual history may not be reliable. So up to 40% of women are uncertain of the menstrual dates, and even when they are certain, gestational age is often overestimated with ultrasound findings. Dating is also, as I have told you, important while using biochemical markers as well as the nuchal translucency. Now the fetal nuchal translucency and trisomy 21. Risk of Down syndrome depends on the age, gestational age, and history of chromosomal defects. NT at 11 to 14 weeks combined with the age is an effective method of screening for trisomy 21. Association between increased NT thickness and chromosomal defects has been shown since early 1990. Average detection rate is 77% with a false positive rate of 4.5%. Now this slide is a little crowded, but here what I have projected that NT and chromosomal defects other than trisomy 21. That is, other sonographic features are also present. Trisomy 18, early onset of IUGR, often occurs and may cause an error in dating the pregnancy. In approximately 30% of these cases, other anomalies such as exomphalos are seen after 11 weeks. Trisomy 13 may also cause early onset of IUGR and severe brain anomalies, mainly holoprosencephaly in up to 30% of cases at 11 to 14 weeks. Turner syndrome is characterized by fetal tachycardia in approximately 50% of the cases, and these fetuses often have large cystic hygromas. In triploidy, there is early onset but symmetrical IUGR with an almost normal sized head. Other severe anomalies are present in approximately 40% of cases, and molar changes in the placenta are seen in approximately 1/3 of these ladies. Now, increase NT and normal karyotype. The NT is more and the karyotype is normal. By definition, 5% of the fetus screened at 11 to 14 weeks have an NT measurement greater than 95 percentile. Most of these fetuses are chromosomally and anatomically normal antenatal and at birth. Fetuses with increased NT thickness but a normal karyotype are at increased risk for number 1, major cardiac fetal defects. Fetal echocardiography at 16 weeks will be helping you out. They may have diaphragmatic hernia, other structural anomalies, exomphalos, rare genetic syndrome, and other unfavorable outcomes that the twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. Stauka and colleague looked at pregnancy outcome of 1,320 chromosomal normal fetuses with the NT thickness more than 3.5 millimeter in the first trimester. Let's see what was their result. When they have compared with the live birth and structural defects, 3.5 to 4.4, this was 86%, and 4.5 to 5.4, 77%. These were without structural defects, and 5.5 to 6.4, 67%, whereas when the NT was more than 6.5 millimeter, it was the live birth without any defect was 31%. Thus, parents should be counseled that even if the NT thickness exceeds 6.5, there is 1 in 3 chances that the pregnancy will end with a live birth of an infant with no other major defects. So, here comes your, you cannot only depend on your NT, you will have to do a chromosomal analysis or use the biochemical marker which I have already shown you. Now, fetal nasal bone. Nasal bones are not visible on ultrasound between 11 and 14 weeks in more than 3% of chromosomally normal fetuses and 60% of fetus with trisomy 21. Methodologic problems surrounding that part of first trimester scan can generate a high false positive rate together with significant intraoperator variability. Now, what is integrated test? First trimester screening you do. Here you are withholding the report. This is unethical. Then you do the second trimester screening. Not cost effective. So, this is not recommended. Now, next is stepwise screening. What you do? You do the first trimester screening. Then if it is your 1 in 50, the chances go for the diagnostic. Then you do the second trimester screening. No delay of reports of high risk cases. Benefit of second trimester markers are available. Drawback, large number of patients will still need the second trimester still, and that is not cost effective. So, we go for the contingent screening. What you do? First do the screening, and if it is low risk, that means if it is more than 1 in 1500, no further test is required. So, no need of second trimester screening. And of course, if it is you are less than 1 in 50, you go for the diagnostic test. And if the results are between 50 and 1500, then you go the second trimester screening. Now, non-invasive prenatal test, that is the NIPT. This is for the identification of aneuploidy due to the chromosome 13, 18 and 21. The sex chromosomes are also tested and reported only if there is an abnormality like Klinefelter syndrome or your Turner syndrome. Because you are not supposed to tell the sex chromosomes studies none of the modalities which you are doing. Whenever they are giving the report, they hide the sex chromosomes, because our PNDT Act is very strict. whenever you are doing all the diagnostic modalities, you should not disclose unless there is a chromosomal defect of the sex chromosomes. Then only they will tell you, otherwise they are not going to tell you. And they should not tell you. This is absolutely unethical and it is banned by European NIPT Act. Now, NIPT positive is confirmed. NIPT is a screening modality, mind you, this is not a test. This is also, you are taking the maternal blood and then you are testing the fetal cells. So, this is not, this is also screening. So, if it is positive, it has to be confirmed by your CVS or amniocentesis. At our hospital till date, 320 NIPT to date has been done and 10 patients were positive, and out of the 10 patients, your 21, trisomy 21 and 18 and triploidy was reported. Now, what are the invasive tests? That means a diagnostic test, amniocentesis, chorionic villus sampling, chordosynthesis are the diagnostics tool. After you have screened and then the screen positive, they allow for essentially 100% accuracy in the diagnosis of fetal aneuploidy, but carry a real little risk of pregnancy loss. That is, if you have done an amniocentesis of CVS, there is 1 in 500 or 1 in chances that the patient might have abortion. Now, coming to the ANC, all patients should be booked patient ideally. Information should be recorded on a document. With this background, now I am coming to the actual antenatal care which are going to provide to the elderly primary gravidas. So, they should be booked. Information should be recorded on a documented paper which should ideally be with you, but you can also give to the patient. Calculation of gestational age is very, very important. I have already, can you get a glass of water? You can hear me? Yes. Then history of present, and see, we are clinicians, we teach our students, whenever the patient is coming to you, you will have to take the history. And all of you know, who are listening to me also, I cannot see you, but naturally you will have to take the menstrual history, history of present illness, that is the present pregnancy, your medical history, obstetric history. But of course, here I am talking about the elderly primary gravidas. So, but still, if she had an abortion before, that will also be recorded. And clinical examination is very, very important, and routine selective investigations are important for the elderly primary gravidas. Now, what is the purpose of routine return to the antenatal visits? We have seen the patient today and you call her again. Why you call them? You want to see whether the malpresentation, whether there is growth restriction, there is preeclampsia, she is developing any gestational diabetes. And also you will have to tell them the health education and the maternal reassurance is very, very important. Observational data suggests that the prenatal care saves lives compared to no prenatal care, and show an association between the number of antenatal visits and or early gestational age at the initiation of care and pregnancy outcomes after controlling for confounding factors at the length of gestation. The typical intervals of prenatal visits which we teach our students, women with uncomplicated pregnancy, are every 4 weeks until 28 weeks. This is taught in our undergraduate student curriculum, and every 2 weeks from 28 to 36 weeks, and then weekly until delivery. But we are here talking about elderly primary gravidas. So, they are coming under high risk group. Depending upon the requirement, the visit can be frequent. Suppose the baby is not growing properly, you have diagnosed. So, you will have to be very, very careful. So, you will have to, depending on the situation, you might be, you cannot stick to the 4 weeks or 2 weeks criteria, which is for the normal pregnant mothers, young pregnant mother. She is the elderly primary, you find the patient has come to you and the baby is not growing. So, you might have to call her after 2 weeks, because the IUGR is diagnosed when you clinically suspect, it is diagnosed and confirmed by ultrasound examination. So, you might have to call her after 2 weeks, depending upon the situation. Now, what investigations you should do at first visit? There are certain routine investigations you should do when patient has come to you, you will advise. Naturally, your blood group, your CBC. Now, in our hospital, we are doing thalassemia screening for all the patients in our institution, but in the government institution, they will say this can be selective investigation, which I have written it below. And suppose she is Rh negative, her husband is positive. In the first visit only, to have the baseline, you have to do the indirect Coombs test. We are also doing VDRL, rubella, IgM, IgG, we are doing for all the patients, hepatitis B, and blood sugar definitely, and urine. Okay. And your blood sugar is also repeated at 28 and 36 weeks also. And urine, of course, should be done in each visit, but whenever necessary, particularly if her blood pressure is rising, you will have to do it more frequently. And the selective investigations which I have mentioned here, electrophoresis and HIV and hepatitis C, but in our hospital, we are doing with a written consent the HIV for all the patients, and elderly primary gravidas, you have to do it. Another important parameter, which is I have put under selective, but I am doing it routinely in our hospital, your thyroid profile, because we find that hypothyroidism is very, very common. And when you are dealing with the primary gravidas, elderly primary gravidas, you have to do her TSH, T4, T3. And then of course, screening for fetal anomalies, which I have already mentioned in detail. 11, we do at 11 to 14 weeks gestation, that is we get an ultrasound done. There we see we date the patient, see an anomaly, and then we do the nasal bone, NT. They give the report, our ultrasonologist, and that report they go for the biochemical markers, your PAPA and beta SCG. Now, if there is more than 1 in 1500, no need of this triple screen at the 17 weeks or the quadruple test at 16 to 17 weeks. But if it is in between, you can do it, or if she is the risk is very high, then she should have to go for the diagnostic modalities. Follow-up visits, ongoing assessment, routine assessment at each prenatal visit typically consists of blood pressure measurement and the weight. The first visit you will do definitely, and the consequent visit also you will do. You will do the urine dipstick protein, although the value of this test is questionable in women with normal blood pressure. Measurement of the uterine size, fundal height for the assessment of the fetal growth, documentation of fetal cardiac activity, and assessment of maternal perception of fetal activity. That is very, very important. You will tell the patient whether she is feeling the baby's movement or not, or if necessary, you can tell her how to record it, and she should have a movement chart, because India is, you are all listening, I am sitting in Gangaram Hospital Tertiary Center, and I am sitting in Delhi and giving you the lecture, but India is not have that naturally that sweet drawing room. So, you will have to depend upon your clinical assessment also, and the assessment of the fetal presentation. Now, here I just want to tell you one thing, the measurement of the uterine size and the fundal height. This is very, very, you with your hand you palpate and then. But here I just want to tell you one thing, if you can measure it with a tape, symphysial fundal height, that is more informative, particularly when you are suspecting the baby is not growing. 24 weeks onwards, the symphysial fundal height in each visit is recommended by your green top guideline of RCOG. Because suppose I will give you an example, a lady has come to you, she is very tall, and you think her baby is not growing, because we have an imaginary line, and then we divide it. The people who are sitting here are not doctors, I think only 2 or 3 doctors are sitting here. We say up to lower 1/3, middle 1/3, and then we measure it. So, this is an arbitrary line. So, if she is a tall, you will think that her baby is not growing, and if she is short, you will think the baby is growing all right. So, the best parameter with the clinical judgment, when we were students, we used to go around with an inchy tape, which is obsolete nowadays, but you should have it. This is all over India. Whoever is listening to me, you can have a just simple measurement. You won't have to go for the ultrasound to document the baby is not growing. So, 24 weeks onwards, you can measure it, and you can say the baby is growing not or not. And of course, then you find it, definitely you send her for the confirmation, because nook and corners, the mushrooming of ultrasound machine is there. But of course, the person behind the machine is very, very important, and you should be very, very careful whom you are sending, that what is the efficacy and how much that person will deliver the goods. So ongoing assessment of gestational age, weight gain is very, very important, as well ongoing discussion of diet, exercise may help prevent the excessive weight gain during the pregnancy and overweight and obesity and postpartum. Now here also I want to tell you that when you are measuring the size of the baby, if she is very obese, because elderly primary may be very, very obese, or she might be having fibroid uterus. So your calculation may not be accurate clinically when you are thinking it's normal growing baby. So here ultrasound will come for your rescue. The first appointment needs to be earlier in pregnancy, prior to 12 weeks. At the first visit, information to be given on topics such as diet, lifestyle changes, pregnancy care, everything you will have to tell them. Identify women who may need additional care and plan the pattern of care for the pregnancy. And here in India, we give them Hematinics and calcium, because most of the people, they are not that health conscious, and when it is elderly primary gravida, she might be deficient in iron. Maybe she is maybe a CEO of some office or something, but she might be deficient in vitamin D because she is working in a closed door, no sunshine. So calcium, iron and B complex has to be prescribed to all these ladies. Now then the next visit, 16 weeks, you review, discuss and document results for all the screening tests and clinical examinations, and if indicated, triple screen, which I have mentioned in a detail when you are going to do. 18 to 20 weeks, you see the structural abnormalities. If the placenta is covering the os, then review at 36 weeks. 24 to 28, spot test, or which is also known as GCT. What does it mean? You call the patient. This is advocated almost. The 75 grams glucose in India, the study is done from Bangalore. Dr. Hema Devakar has a greatest experience on this. 75 grams of glucose, patient is coming to you not with empty stomach. They had a normal food. You load with 75 grams of glucose and take the blood after 2 hours. But if you are giving 50 grams of glucose, you take the blood after 1 hour. Then also, if that is more than 140, then you should go for GTT. GTT is glucose tolerance test. Now, a fetal echocardiography is not done as a routine in all the hospitals, but we are usually recommending in elderly primary gravidas, because I have told you, even with the non-structural, without any aneuploidy also, they can have cardiac defect. So you should do fetal echocardiography and ultrasound, Doppler clinical examination, and ICT. If she is Rh negative, has to be repeated. And here we give them ROGAM also at 28 weeks of gestation. 30 weeks clinical examination, fetal surveillance. 34 weeks clinical examination, fetal surveillance, and a few people recommend the second dose of anti-D. 36 to 40, very, very important, fetal surveillance. Now, simple technology is, which I have mentioned, fetal surveillance, fundus simplicial height for identify IUGR, I have told you. Fetal movement chart I have mentioned. Maternal perception of fetal movement has been used to assess the fetal health. Decreased fetal movements are defined differently, less than 2 movements per hour or 10 movements per hour in 12 hours. But normally I ask my patients, so where I want to have them, that after each meal, you lie down for an hour and count it. Normally it is more during the night time. If the baby is moving 10 to 12 times, not to worry. But if it is less, come and see me. The main purpose of fetal surveillance, why you do want to do a fetal surveillance? To detect the fetal hypoxia or asphyxia, whether baby is in danger or not. Fetal hemostatic response to the hypoxia and asphyxia changes has been seen in the animal models, and ultrasound assessment, AVI and biophysical profile, Doppler velocimetry and cardiotocograph. Now here the fetal surveillance is very, very important when I am talking about your asphyxia is the Doppler changes. And what is Doppler? Several studies indicate Doppler indices are powerful indicator of adverse perinatal outcome. Sensitivity is 60%, specificity 85%, positive predictive value is 64%. Now in Doppler what we do, we see the uterine arteries, umbilical arteries, middle cerebral arteries, renal, splenic, ductus venosus is very, very important. Now when there is an abnormal blood flow, you can see there is a notching here. This patient was 31 weeks pregnancy. This is the notching, this is a notching. This is very, very abnormal because this should not be there in the 31, 32 weeks. Now here I just want to tell you a little about the embryology. Now what happens, placenta is formed by two portions. One is the maternal portion, decidua basilis. One is the fetal portion, chorionic frondosum. Now what is decidua basilis? What happens, there the uterine arteries, the two uterine arteries run parallel to the uterus. From there, in a circular manner, they give the radial arteries. From there, the spiral arteries are formed and they are going to the decidua. This spiral, you all know, these vessels have three layers, tunica adventitia, tunica media. So tunica media is a muscles layer. Now during pregnancy, what happens, this muscle layer goes away. What is the basis of Doppler? This muscle layer goes away. As a result, the thick vessels like my finger becomes a flask-like vessels which are and they go on supplying the placental bed. And from the fetal side, there is chorionic frondosum. There, I think if you remember your undergraduate level primary villi, they are syncytiotrophoblasts, cytotrophoblasts, then the vessels come. So the Doppler, when you are seeing, this is the uterine vessels, you see the radial vessels, and first wave of decidualization, the first trimester, is the spiral arteries loses their musculature and the radial artery at the second trimester. So by 26-week gestation, if there is a persistent notching, this is absolutely abnormal. So what should be the normal uterine vessel look like? It should look like this. This is the systole and this is the diastolic flow. And whereas this slide you see, there is a notching, this is notching, this is absolutely abnormal. So this patient is going to have either high blood pressure, or she is going to have IUGR, or she is going to have intrauterine potential candidate for fetal hypoxemia. Now this is the Doppler of from the maternal side, that is the fetal side, the umbilical artery flow you have seen. This is the normal Doppler flow, and this is, you see, the diastolic flow is not there, and here you see the reversal of flow. This is the systole and this is the reversal of flow, and in the absence of intervention, this fetus is going to die within 7 days. Then this is the AEDV, that is absent end diastolic velocity. You can see there is no flow, this is no flow, only the systole you can see. This 70% decrease in the placental circulation, this baby is a great danger. So if you find that there is absent end diastolic velocity, reversal of velocity, adverse perinatal outcome, high perinatal mortality, risk of chromosomal abnormalities, and high incidence of congenital malformations and fetal infections. So for all these primary gravidas, Doppler should be done one at 24 weeks, and next if you are suspecting the baby is not growing. Otherwise it is not indicated, okay. But if the baby is not growing, then it is said that if it is AEDV, that means absent end diastolic velocity or reversal flow, you should do every day, because you want to deliver the baby, and I have told you they are compromised babies. Now you see the cerebral circulation also, that is MCA, but we do it under the conjunction with the umbilical artery. In healthy pregnancies, cerebrospinal placental ratio is more than 1, and cerebral RI is the numerator, umbilical artery is the denominator, and ratio less than 1 is considered indicative of disease or abnormality. Occurrence of venous pulsation, if you find that the inferior vena cava, there is pulsation in the baby, this is a very, very ominous sign, the baby is going to die. So it indicates congestive heart failure and a compromised fetus. So AEDV, if you find without venous pulsation 10% of perinatal mortality, fetuses with venous pulsation 54% mortality. So in conclusion, antepartum care for ladies more than 35 years is very important. First and second trimester screening for aneuploidy and picking up of congenital anomalies. Women should be counseled age-related risk of fetal aneuploidy and offer prenatal screening and prenatal diagnosis. A detailed second trimester ultrasound will detect anomalies unrelated to aneuploidy. Clinical examination and antepartum fetal surveillance is very, very important to prevent unexplained fetal death after 36 weeks. Women should be counseled that they have an increased risk of both early and late complication of pregnancy and should come for the regular antenatal checkup, which is absolutely essential. Then only she will be able to go home with a healthy baby. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thanks, Dr. Indrani, to acquainting us on this subject. Some questions from the doctors registered in the webinar have been answered, while there are some questions. Dr. KK Singhania from Assam is asking a question, is cystic hygroma an indication for termination of the pregnancy? Should we go for NIFTY or there should be any other test? Dr. Rita Bhambri from Patiala also asked antenatal detection for cystic hygroma.
So what is cystic hygroma? This is, you can see, the really an increased NT, that is a nuchal translucency. There is a swelling at the nape of the neck, behind the neck. Now it will all depend, it is definitely not an indication of termination jumping, but however it might be. So you will have to rule out that the baby is not chromosomally abnormal. Of course, if there is a chromosomal abnormality is there, definitely nobody wants to have a abnormal baby. So you will have to terminate. And it also depends upon the how big it is. If it is a small cystic hygroma, no chromosomal abnormalities, maybe the child will be all right on itself. So no need of termination. So moral of the story, cystic hygroma, you do chromosomal abnormality, rule out chromosomal abnormalities. If there is abnormality, terminate. And so far NIFTY is concerned, as I have mentioned, NIFTY is a screening test. Okay. So if it is cystic hygroma and NIFTY is a test where you take the blood, and in India also, in our hospital also, the test blood is collected in somewhere in Gurgaon, because they have a special, nowadays there is lots of PNDT strictures. So in our hospital also we are not collecting the blood. Blood is collected in Gurgaon in some place, I don't know the exact place where it is, and then it is sent to USA, and from USA we are getting the test result, and it is 28,000 to 30,000. Okay. So NIFTY, if you have a doubt that there is a chromosomal abnormality, no role of NIFTY, you will have, because NIFTY if positive, you will have to go for amniocentesis. So I'll advise you, no role of NIFTY if it is a cystic hygroma, you go straight for chromosomal confirmation by at what stage you have diagnosed it and do amniocentesis. I hope you have got your answer. If not, you can revert back to me.
Yeah. Ma'am, Dr. G.S. Nair from Delhi asks, what is preeclampsia?
Dr. Nair, this is taught in our undergraduate days only, what is preeclampsia. So I think you can ask your students only, you know this is a high blood pressure with proteinuria, and the patient has not yet developed the eclampsia, that is a stage.
Dr. Nirbhik from Delhi asks about the precautions to be taken for twins. I think you have answered this question.
The precautions in twin I have really not answered. Precautions of twin, if first of all you have to know the chorionicity, whether it is a dichorionic or monochorionic. If it is a monochorionic, your responsibility is more. Dichorionic twin, of course twin pregnancies, you advise them, they are the potential candidate for going into premature labor, spontaneous abortion, and they will have to take more of iron, B complex, rest, and depending upon the situations, whether in monochorionic way, why I said they will have to take be more cautious, because monochorionic means both the twins are in the same sac. As a result, conjoined twin chances are going to be more. tangling of the twins will be more of your umbilical cord tangling, and not only that, twin-to-twin transfusion and the Steele syndrome. So all these things will be coming. So the early weeks of the, you diagnose whether it's monochorionic and dichorionic. Dichorionic, of course, you have to take extra care for it because the two babies are going inside your tummy.
Ma'am, Dr. Poonam asks for the implications of blood pressure, the rise in it, and how to control it.
Dr. Poonam from?
From Delhi.
I don't know, Poonam, you're from which institution. The high blood pressure, of course, to be controlled by depending upon how much she is having the high blood pressure, at what gestation she is having the high blood pressure. You have not said that she is whether preeclamptic toxemia or she is at essential hypertension. Now, if she is essential hypertension, she is having the blood pressure from the very beginning of her pregnancy, then naturally she will have to continue with her antihypertensive treatment, and you will have to be careful that she does not have a superavid eclampsia. So, the eclampsia, PET, as I have already mentioned, she is having albuminuria, she is having excessive weight gain, so you have to take care. And if you are thinking about that, whether any drug to be given to her to prevent the preeclampsia, people have tried your aspirin but there are lots of controversies. There's studies were there. So they used to give your ecospirin for the patients, but really there is lots of controversies in the horizon as and when. But when you are giving antihypertensive drugs to the patient, the perinatal mortality or morbidity does not change. This is here you are giving the blood pressure medicine to control the maternal complications. And here also the fetal surveillance is very, very important, because most of the patients with your preeclamptic toxemia will have intra-uterine growth retardation, which I have mentioned. Here your Doppler study will come for your rescue. And when it's severe preeclamptic toxemia, impending eclampsia, you will have to terminate the pregnancy depending upon the situation. And we don't control the, in our old age days, we used to say no salt. No, you have to take the salt, no extra salt, but salt has to be taken. So you just, and there is no role of Lasix unless the patient has gone into pulmonary edema or failure. So you will just give them little sedation, bed rest, and whenever indicated, you can give her antihypertensive, and the fetal surveillance is very, very important. And whenever, because the most positive or the definite treatment of preeclampsia is termination of pregnancy. So depending upon the, naturally you want to give her a healthy baby also, she is an elderly primary gravida. So, and if you are terminating her early, here you should have asked me the question, what is the role of betamethasone? That you have not asked, Poonamji. You should have asked that because you are dealing with a preeclamptic toxemia, whether you will give her betamethasone or not. Yes, I'll give.
Dr. Simi Kabir from Assam wants to know the investigations and treatment of PIH and hyperthyroidism in elderly.
See, PIH and PET, all you are going the same, I have already given. And if the patient is hypothyroid, without any hesitation, thyroid, whatever drug she is taking, whether it is an Eltroxin, Thyronorm, Thyrox, has to be continued. I tell them, if you stop it, you are going to produce a Buddhu baby. So they are all scared. They will all continue because they have got an effect on the neural development. So if your patient is hypothyroid, you should continue with the medicine. Maybe the requirement goes up sometimes. So time to time, as your antenatal visit, you will have to repeat the TSH and T4, and then depending upon the situation, you will have to adjust the drug. And PIH and PET, I think I have already talked twice.
Yeah. Ma'am, Dr. Rahul from Sanguru asks, is infertility a hereditary disorder?
Anyway, infertility cannot be a hereditary disorder. See, whenever there is an infertility, you should know, my dear child, I know who you are, that there is a male factor and female factor is there. And most of the time in our Indian scenario, always the ladies are at fault. So it's not the fact. So the male might be the problem. And when you are talking about the infertility, you know, the male you have gone, okay, he is fine. Then coming to the female, what are the causes? Normally, whenever fertilization takes place, they have to have a healthy ova and a open tubes. So, those two conditions cannot be hereditary. Okay, it is not a hereditary disorder, unless of course, she is a case of your variant of gonadal dysgenesis, but that is also not a hereditary, I should say. The mother has produced you. So, the mother has definitely turned it. The sisters can be have a variant of gonadal dysgenesis, they can be having the problem, but so as such I cannot say that it is a hereditary disorder.
Surely not. Dr. Ishita from Faridabad says that childbearing post 35 has become the norm rather than being an exception. So, what do the screening results of such patients are available in Gangaram Hospital indicate?
Whatever I have told you, Ishita, the first trimester and the second trimester screen all are available at Gangaram Hospital, and we all do the in-house investigations only, even not only the screening of your first trimester screening and the integrated screening, stepwise screening, but we have Doppler, we have fetal echo, we have the ultrasound, everything is available at Gangaram Hospital. Of course, beside all your hematological and your normal biochemical tests, which is done in any other hospitals.
Dr. Indrajit Kaur from Hoshiarpur has a query. Can surrogacy be asked for by simple will of the couple even when there are no indications available?
So, this question, I mean when there is no indication, no, I think there is lots of media hype with your, I think some of the, I have seen in some of the actors and actresses going on and all those things, but ethically I think it is definitely not indicated. If you go by that thing, if you want to have, then adopt a child, what's the fun? And I think in the TV I have seen some, I don't want to name any actor's name, but I think if you ask me, it is definitely not required, and whether I should put it as unethical or not, I don't know. At least if the couple comes to me, I'll definitely demotivate them.
Ma'am, there is a patient, Sajjad Hussain from Delhi, asked that his wife is 15 to 18 weeks pregnant and is bleeding lightly for the past 2 weeks. Could you please explain the reason, because his gynecologist is unable to explain the reason why there is the light bleeding from past 2 weeks and the patient is 15 to 18 weeks pregnant.
The 15 to 18 weeks pregnancy, bleeding could be your placenta previa. Placenta previa means when the placenta is covering the os sajjadji, and if that is the cause, your ultrasonologist will tell you, and it is definitely very, very important you take rest, otherwise she can have a torrential bleeding. And the second cause could be that she is threatened, we call it a threatened abortion. So, there also you have to take the rest and get an ultrasound and done and see how is the condition of the baby. And the third cause could be local cause. They must see the cervix, put a little speculum, and whether there is any local cause like polyp or any growth present or not. These should be the causes of, first is your threatened abortion, second is placenta previa, and third will be local cause.
Dr. Vimlesh Sharma from Hapur asks, after triple trisomy 21 is positive, what should be done?
She should go for the definite investigations, amniocentesis should be done.
Thank you, Dr. Indrani, for this elucidative lecture.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
After this.
Bolo. No, actually I tell you, I understand your question. I mean the marker is positive and whether patient does not want to have amniocentesis, because these type of...
Another factor is the concern of cost as well. Not only their own choice, but as regards the sensitivity is concerned, is it as good as can it replace amniocentesis also?
No,
It will
no,
not miss
no,
anything?
no, definitely. We are not telling them that it can replace. I have categorically mentioned that in our patient 320, 10 were positive for your this thing, trisomy 21 and 18. So, I mean, this is a screening test. If you have any doubt in your mind, you have to have an amniocentesis. See, 1 in 500, we tell the patient, your chances of abortion, but most of the time they continue with the pregnancy. But you are absolutely right question, because we have patients, they have just cared because they have lost 3-4 children, I mean, abortion she had. So she didn't want to take a chance. They are opting for NIFTY, it is 28,000. They opt for this, and if that is negative, then it can be reassured. This is reassured.
That's what I'm asking. That is reassuring.
99.9% they say.
3 of my patients got this NIFTY done in last 1.5 months time, but all of them turned out to be negative. So we don't need to repeat triple or quadruple marker later on?
No.
It is 100% assured.
It is not 100%, 99.9%.
yeah.
99.9% it is, definitely. Because see, if the NIFTY is positive, they should be advised to have a definitive diagnostic tests.
Then amniocentesis should be done.
Should be done. These patients, with 10 patients I have said, one was Klinefelter, one was Turner, okay? And naturally they have not reported it, and the less 7s were the trisomy 21 and 18, and after amniocentesis, they were positive.
In all 3 of them?
All three, they were positive. So if it is positive, you will have to get it done without any hesitation. But now the patients are going for it. In my practice also, they opt for it, and it is negative, they relapse. But the positive, you have to repeat it.
Yeah, in fact, all 3 of them went to Gangaram.
They are
in
all
New
from
Delhi.
Gangaram. This is 320 patients.
No, 3 of my patients also went to Gangaram to get the test done.
So maybe they are this group they will be. But Gangaram is not collecting the blood. The blood is being collected. They only do the formalities. Because
BGI is doing that.
There are so many legal hassles are there. So that is the whole problem. Thank you very much. Yes.
Good evening, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
I have a question. There's a patient of mine who was post-CA breast, had one child. She had CA breast at the age of 29. Underwent, that was stage 1, underwent lumpectomy, and that was all receptors negative. So she underwent chemo as well as radiation. Her one child is a girl child. And it's been more than a year and a half, and now she's asking for another pregnancy. So for how long should I say, you...
Normally when they are on chemotherapy, we advise them at least for 2 years, they should not. 2 years after the chemotherapy.
Post-chemotherapy.
Post-chemotherapy. Because usually all the cells and... actually nowadays what they do, they can do the ovarian, cryopreservation of the ova before giving the chemotherapy, so that they have the healthy ovas for your ART. You understand? So, particularly the male ka to hota hi hai. You understand? If a male is going for chemotherapy for testicular problems, they preserve the sperm. And then that is utilized for the wife. So here also, actually, they are coming to that only. But this is a breast cancer, but the problem is the ovarian cancer. Suppose the ovarian cancer, you don't know the ova might be bad from the very beginning. So as is a breast cancer, she should have gone for cryopreservation before taking her for the chemotherapy. That would have been the ideal, because now, Madanji, the problem is this patient, even if she's trying, her ova may not be healthy one.
Yeah.
You understand my point? I'm not talking, maybe she will not conceive, or even if she conceives, there must be some chromosomal aberration or gene mutation, so she might be a potential candidate for your abnormal babies.
But that could be because of the chemotherapy?
Yes, the chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, this is nothing to do with age. Because she is asking me that how long. Normally when you give them methotrexate or anything, we ask them to wait for at least, methotrexate is a milder one. We for 1 year. And then if chemotherapy, 2 years. But how much?
Would she not be at more risk of having breast cancer again because of the pregnancy-related hormone changes, estrogens and...
Now see, this is and she's receptor positive or negative?
She's receptor negative.
Negative.
This time she's receptor negative.
Of course, there will be more chances, there's without any hesitation. But here the surrogacy will come.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Surrogacy.
Here she will be better off with the surrogacy. And if she would have preserved her cryopreserver ova, that would have been excellent one. Should have, because you want to have a healthy baby. It's, look, the thing is this, you have a desire to become a mother. That is very good. But you'll have to see how long you're going to live. Now there was lots of controversy that a 63 years old lady produced her children. I think, is it desirable? Is it desirable? I mean, there's lots of controversy in this issue, not in elderly primary gravidas. At 63, if you're going to produce 2 children, who is going to look after those children? The father is also an old man. So they will go to orphanage. No, no. This is a social issue. Social issue.
We do get certain requests like this.
I
Somebody
know,
got
I know,
ligated.
but
they want
as a doctor, you'll have to be
recanalizations.
very strong, Madanji, to say कि no to them. तुम सोचोगे तुम्हारे से दूसरे में जाता है, जाने दो. But you'll have to you have to answerable to your own self. This is my way of thinking, not to anybody
you.
else.
Thank you, Dr. Indrani. Thank you, ma'am. After revealing the management of antenatals, we move ahead to the elucidation of success rate of assisted reproduction technology. Infertility affects approximately 15 to 20% of reproductive age couples. Considering modern trends of maternity postponement and the increasing demand for ART, the evaluation of functional ovarian reserve has arisen in an attempt to better counsel interested couples and guide the stimulation protocols with the reduction of emotional and financial burdens of a hard and stressful progress. Age being the most important factor in determining the quality and quantity of ovarian reserve, we have direct and indirect measures for evaluation of ovarian reserve. To have the basic understanding of ovarian reserve, the diagnosis of reserves and the clinical implications of these biomarkers, we have with us the head of the Department of Biochemistry at Dr. Lal Path Labs, Dr. Nimmi. Dr. Nimmi will reveal the basic issues and understanding of indirect and direct biomarkers and its clinical implications. Dr. Nimmi is a graduate of NRS Medical College, Calcutta University, and MD from University of Medical Sciences, Delhi University. Since 9 years, she has been associated with various institutes like Dr. RML, Maharaja Agarsen, Kasturba Hospital, MAMC, Rajiv Gandhi, and she is currently working with Dr. Lal Path Labs as HOD, the head of the Department of Biochemistry. I welcome Dr. Nimmi Kansal.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ratima, for the introduction. I'll be presenting biomarkers of ovarian reserve. As mentioned by Dr. Indrani also, ma'am also highlighted the thing with that modern trends with the career-oriented women. Nowadays, more and more female, they are delaying their childbearing because they want to settle down in their career, they have a work pressure. So there is a delay in pregnancy, and with this delay in pregnancy, the infertility is also increasing. So the demand of assisted reproductive technology and most commonly IVF is also increasing. So when a patient coming to the clinician, it is very important for the clinician to decide when the patient comes for ART, they have to predict that who are the patients who are going to respond to the gonadotropin therapy and who are the patients who are going to conceive. To address these issues, ovarian reserve tests are available which can help clinician to predict the response. So, we know that primary function of the ovary is production of mature and viable oocyte which is capable of fertilization. At birth, all females are born with a finite number of oocytes which is known as ovarian reserve, and ovarian reserve, it declines with age, and but how much it will decline in a female, it is unpredictable, though it declines in all the females, but this decline is highly variable. So, infertility affects approximately 15 to 20% of reproductive age couple. What is ovarian reserve? Ovarian reserve refers to number and quality of oocytes that at any given age are available to produce a dominant follicle late in follicular phase of menstrual cycle. Ovarian reserve test, they provide an indirect estimate of women's remaining follicular pool. An ideal ovarian reserve test would be which is easy to perform, which is reproducible, and the decision based on these results can help clinician to differentiate between a woman who will be responding normally and who will have a poor response. For a clinician, it is important to identify those females who will have a poor response. Why it is important to know who will have, first we will discuss why measure ovarian reserve. We know that oocyte number and the quality, it decreases with the age, and fertility varies significantly from among the women along with the age, and different patients, they respond differently to the ovarian stimulation. So, for a clinician, it is important to understand who will respond and what are the chances of pregnancy. So, these ovarian reserve tests, they will help the clinician to predict likely success of ART, to plan treatment strategies, to better counsel interested couple. So, if a clinician knows by doing ovarian reserve test that they can identify couples who are likely to have poor response, they can counsel the patient before starting the therapy, so that the patient is mentally prepared for the outcome, and if the response is very poor, then maybe they may not take her for ovarian stimulation. Thus, these ovarian reserve tests, they can help the clinician to counsel, it can help the patient emotionally, and financial burden can also be taken care of. So, what is the cause of diminished ovarian reserve? We know ovarian reserve is a complex clinical phenomena which is influenced by age, genetics, and environmental variables. Most of the time, the cause of diminished ovarian reserve is not known. It is not known whether it is a pathological condition due to rapid atresia in normal oocyte pool, or it is the normal atresia. The oocytes are undergoing atresia at a normal rate, but the initial pool only was very small, and maybe the patient presenting to you, they are simply the end of normal bell shaped population distribution. Definitely the patients who are undergoing chemotherapy, pelvic irradiation, and genetic abnormalities, these are the some known causes. Who should be evaluated for ovarian reserve? Women over the age of 30 years of age, women with a history of exposure to confirmed gonadotoxin such as tobacco smoking, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, or women with a strong family history of early menopause or premature ovarian failure. Women who have had extensive ovarian surgery, that is ovarian cystectomy and unilateral oophorectomy. Now, what are the ovarian reserve tests available? Ovarian reserve test can be categorized into 4 groups: biological, biochemical, biophysical, and histological. Biological are age. Age is the very important predictor and the most important predictor for ORT. Biochemical test can be divided into 2 groups: static and dynamic. And static tests are FSH, inhibin B, estradiol, and AMH. And dynamic tests are clomiphene citrate challenge test. Biophysical is ultrasound. In ultrasound, the most important marker is antral follicle count and ovarian volume. This is just to recapitulate the normal reproductive endocrinology. We know that female is born with a definite number of primordial follicle. They have a gonadotropin independent phase, and then there is a FSH dependent phase. In every cycle, prior to the cycle, the pre-antral and antral follicle, they start developing. These are the primary and secondary follicle which secrete AMH, and then they develop into small antral follicle, dominant follicle, and one of the follicle becomes dominant. So, these are the developing follicles which secrete inhibin B and estradiol. Inhibin B and estradiol then inhibit pituitary, and the FSH secretion is reduced. They inhibit secretion of FSH. So, that is how the normal hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis is maintained. But as a female grows, the cycle, we know that menstrual pattern is also very important when a patient comes to us. In addition to age, her menstrual pattern is also important. Normally, like menstrual pattern is, we know that on an average it is 28 days, but as with the age, the menstrual cycle, the length of the cycle, it also reduces. The reason for that, as the number of follicles reduces, the level of inhibin B also reduces, and thus there is a early rise in FSH. Age being an important marker, we know that the number of follicles declines, and with the age the fertility decreases. So, we know that at the age of 20 to 24 years, the percentage infertility is only 6%, whereas it goes on increasing with age, and at the age of 40 to 44 years, the infertility percentage is as high as 64%. And similarly, the pregnancy rate also reduces. At the age of 19 to 26 years, the patient may have a pregnancy rate of 50%, whereas at the age of 40, the pregnancy rate is as low as only 30%. So, age and infertility, age is a very important marker to be considered. Then basal FSH, which is the most widely used and most studied marker, and it is available since 1980s. You know that basal FSH is most commonly used because this is the very easily available, it is cost effective, and it gives you a glimpse about the functioning of hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. But day 3 FSH is an indirect measure of ovarian function, because it is dependent, the secretion of FSH is regulated by various factors like inhibins, activins, estradiol, folistatins, etc. And an increase in FSH occurs due to follicle depletion, ovarian aging, indicating diminished ovarian reserve. But the fall in increase in FSH occurs at very late stage. Ovarian reserve may have depleted very earlier, but the limitation of FSH that it starts rising very late in the reproductive age. Different cutoff have been used. Van der Steeg et al., they defined FSH more than 8 IU per ml in 40 years, the chances of spontaneous pregnancy is very low. Cruz et al. Showed that the mean FSH concentration was very high in the patients who had cancelled cycles. Pregnancy rate in a woman less than 35 years of age with high FSH is higher as compared to older women with normal FSH. This indicates that like at a younger age, though the FSH may be high, but the female might be having good quality of oocytes. A wide range in threshold value has been suggested for FSH, and some has suggested a cutoff of 25 IU per liter. The basic issues, though FSH is easily available, widely accepted, but still there are certain basic issues for using basal FSH as the only marker for ovarian rhythm. The reason being there is a high intercycle and intracycle variability. The between cycle fluctuation is very high. single day 3 measurement is not a very accurate predictor. Moreover, we know that for ovarian reserve marker, their predictive value is very important. We know if the prevalence predictive value, it depends upon the prevalence. In a younger patient, the FSH sensitivity might be good, but the prevalence of diminished ovarian reserve is very low. So, therefore, in a young patient, predictive value of FSH is very poor as compared to the value of FSH in a older woman. So, increased FSH, so if we use very high cutoff of FSH, then only it has very good specificity, otherwise the predictive value is low. So, FSH is a late indicator of decreased ovarian reserve, and it is a good predictor when high thresholds are used, and should not be used as a initial marker in subfertile female with normal cycle. Estradiol is another marker which is used for ovarian reserve. It is produced by granulosa cells and reflects follicular activity, but it is never used alone as a marker of ovarian reserve. We know that there are certain issues related with high E2. If we find high E2 in earlier follicular phase, it could suggest follicular development inappropriate for day 3, or there could be large number of ventral follicles like in PCOS. So, if the E2 level is high in early follicular phase, it will suppress FSH, and which may be misinterpreted as low or normal FSH. Therefore, it is recommended that FSH and E2, they should be examined in the same sample at the same time. Basal E2 value, some authors like Everest et al., they have shown a cutoff of 60 picogram per ml. Basal E2 level, if greater than 60, it predicts high cancellation rate, where their hypothesis was supported by Fritrelli et al. They gave a cutoff of E2 less than 20 and greater than 80 are suggestive of higher cancellation rate. Estradiol has its own limitation, that it has a low predictive accuracy, it lacks sensitivity and specificity. Therefore, it cannot be used as a predictive marker, but it can be used as a prognosticator to judge the response to exogenous gonadotrophic stimulation. Anti-Mullerian hormone, it was first mentioned in 1940 by A. Jost. It is a protein produced, it was recognized as a protein produced by testes, which is responsible for regression of Mullerian ducts. 40 years later, the gene was located on the short arm of chromosome 19 and its receptor was identified. It is a peptide homodimer of 140 kD weight. It is a family, it is a member of tumor growth factor beta family, and it is mainly known for its utility as a ovarian reserve marker. In females, production of AMH starts at 36 weeks of gestation. It is undetectable at birth, starts increasing by the age of 2 to 4 years, and then it increases continuously till puberty and starts decreasing due to, after puberty it starts decreasing due to decreasing number of follicles. It is produced by the pre-antral follicle, and as the follicle matures, the antral follicles and the dominant follicle, they do not express AMH. AMH expression disappears from the antral follicles. So, AMH is not expressed by the theca cells and atretic cells also. What is the role of AMH in females? The main role of AMH is to inhibit recruitment of follicles from the primordial pool. In the absence of AMH, primordial follicles, they are recruited at a very faster rate and are exhausted prematurely. AMH is considered to be reflective of non-FSH dependent follicular growth, and growing follicles are more sensitive to FSH in the absence of AMH. It has been suggested probably AMH also inhibits aromatase activity, thus production of estradiol. This is just to depict that how AMH acts, primarily by inhibiting recruitment of follicles from the primordial pool. what is the role of AMH in ovarian follicular genesis? Studies suggest that presence of AMH acts as a brake on the activation of primordial follicle and the growth of preantral follicle, and that is the reason, like in the absence of AMH, there is the follicles are recruited at a faster rate and there is early exhaustion of the follicles. Both in vitro and vivo studies have shown that follicles are more sensitive to FSH in the absence of AMH, and this has suggested probably in a coming time recombinant AMH may be used as a contraception. AMH, we know that with the increasing age there is decreasing fecundability, and therefore, reproduction also reproductive aging varies considerably and largely based on the age related changes in the ovarian function. The decreased fecundability is due to decreasing follicular number, diminished oocyte quality, menstrual cycle irregularity, altered endocrine signaling and genetic component. So, AMH is a marker which is independent of gonadotrophins. It has correlated very well with the antral follicle count, and it has been shown by many study AMH is the only serum marker which correlates very well with the antral follicle count. It is independent of gonadotrophins. It indirectly reflects the number of follicles that have made transition from primordial pool to growing follicle. Van Raju et al., they suggested that AMH is a novel measure of ovarian reserve as its level falls throughout the reproductive life. D. Vete et al., they also gave observed that serum AMH level on day 3 of menstrual cycle shows a progressive decrease with age, and it appears to correlate very well with AFC, age and FSH. AMH has been suggested as a marker of ovarian reserve because of its strong correlation with antral follicle count. It predicts occurrence of menopause with high accuracy. AMH is lower in patients. It has been observed that AMH is lower in patient with poor response to ART than in a woman with normal response. AMH levels are not influenced by gonadotrophin status, and it gives the most important benefit which is given to the patient, that it can be measured independent of the day, because there is AMH shows very low intracycle variability and intercycle variability. So, that is the greatest advantage, that it can be measured on any day of the cycle. This table is showing the comparison of AMH with the most widely used marker of ovarian reserve. If we see that the AMH among all the markers, AMH and AFC, they are equally good in predicting the response to gonadotrophin stimulation. In predicting the hyper response to the gonadotrophin stimulus, AMH has shown to be a better marker than AFC, whereas AMH and AFC both are showing more or less intercycle variability, though I will say AFC has more intercycle and intracycle variability. And another thing, AFC is dependent upon the operator also. So, AMH and AMH level declines gradually with this is something important, that a patient who is going on ART, who is taking gonadotrophin stimulation, AMH should not be measured. Why? Because AMH declines gradually when a patient is on gonadotrophin stimulation. Thus, AMH measurement should not be performed during treatment with gonadotrophin. The reason, the hypothesis given why AMH decline during gonadotrophin stimulation is probably FSH directly or indirectly inhibit secretion of AMH, or it may be if stimulation, you are giving gonadotrophin stimulation, more and more follicles are growing, and there is a when they grow, they lose, they do not express AMH. That may be the reason that the AMH falls, though it is not clear, but it is recommended that AMH should not be measured if patient is taking gonadotrophin, if gonadotrophin treatment is being given to the patient. And it has been shown to be a better marker than day 3 FSH, E2 and inhibin B. AMH has been shown to be to help tailor therapy also, because if AMH level is low, which predicts poor response, if the low AMH is observed, then the cancellation and poor response may be anticipated, and the couple can be informed about the chances of the success. Counseling can be done, though there is a false positivity rate of 10 to 20% when the cutoff of 0.7 to 0.75 nanogram per ml is used. They say that if this cutoff is used, 75% of the patient are correctly identified as poor responder, though the false positivity rate of 10 to 20% is there. So, what is recommended that if you find a AMH level of 0.7 or below, these patients should be counseled for the like when you take up for the treatment, they should be counseled that the response expected is poor, but that should not be denied any treatment. They said the treatment should be denied only when it is very, very low, say it is less than 0.1. Maybe you think of an alternate, and maybe you can think of not inducing the patient. AMH also plays very important role in predicting OHSS, because very high level of AMH are seen in PCOS patient, and it predicts OHSS with a sensitivity of 90.5% and specificity of 81.3%. The risk factor for OHSS are young age, low BMI, signs of PCOS, previous history of OHSS, and high E2 levels on the day of HCG. So, high AMH level suggests that the patient is at risk of hyper response. Patient should be counseled about the risk, and the treatment can be tailored accordingly. So, the main advantage of AMH in ART is it gives you a quantitative response. It has low inter and intracycle variability. It is menstrual cycle independent marker, but there is a controversy regarding its qualitative role. AMH does not give much information about the oocyte quality, and is not a useful predictor, or till now its usefulness has not been established in predicting pregnancy rate. Inhibin B is another marker which is a glycoprotein hormone of tumor growth factor beta family. It is secreted by granulosa cells, and it increases insidiously till midpoint of follicular phase and selectively inhibits FSH release. There is a negative correlation between FSH level and inhibin B level, and positive inhibin B levels correlates positively with antral follicle count. So, low levels of inhibin B, they predicts poor outcome. Inhibin B level of greater than 45 picogram per ml suggests it has been shown that if the level is greater than 45, estrogen response is better and number of oocytes obtained are also better, whereas if the inhibin B level is less than 45 picogram per ml, the cancellation rate is 3 times higher. Significant correlation has been shown between inhibin B level and number of oocytes retrieved by Alder et al. And other studies, but there is a controversy. Some studies they have shown that there is no that inhibin B is not a very good predictor of ovarian reserve. So, inhibin B has a modest accuracy in predicting response, and it may be used for counseling purpose. The dynamic test which is very commonly used is clomiphene citrate challenge test, which was first described by Nevot et al. Clomiphene citrate is a SERM which inhibits estrogen receptor in hypothalamus. The woman with adequate, the principle lies on the fact that if a woman has adequate ovarian reserve, she will be able to produce in her follicular phase, she will be able to produce enough estradiol and inhibin B to suppress FSH and will resist any increase in FSH induced by clomiphene citrate. So, the procedure is day 3 FSH is taken, basal FSH of the patient is taken on day 3. Then from day 5 to 9 clomiphene citrate 100 milligram is given, and on day 10 FSH is measured again. if the FSH level is more than 10 IU per liter, this is suggestive of diminished ovarian reserve. Some authors have found that CCC clomiphene citrate challenge test is a better predictor of ovarian reserve than D3 FSH alone. Other studies demonstrated CCT has no advantage over basal FSH, especially in young women. So, in predicting pregnancy, CCT is not superior to basal FSH. There are certain CCT has its own limitation, that patient requires 2 visits are required, and then the patient there is an unknown variable we are introducing by, because the patient has to take drugs from day 5 to day 9. So, you cannot assure of compliance. So, that is an unknown variable which is introduced when you are looking at the results of CC3. Ultrasonographic measure is antral follicle count. Antral follicle counts the sum of what is antral follicle count? It is the sum of antral follicles measuring about 2 to 10 millimeter in both the ovaries and detected by TVS in early follicular phase. AFC has been shown to be a predictor of response to IVF cycle, cancellation rate in IVF, and predict pregnancy loss in IVF. Antral follicle count AFC is as good a marker as AMH in determining ovarian reserve status, as stated by Nedro et al. 2007, and AFC demonstrated best correlation with age as mentioned by Schaeffer et al. In 2003. Low AFC cutoff is highly specific, 3 to 4 is highly specific for predicting poor response, but it has low sensitivity. The factors which can affect AFC measurement are oral contraceptive and PCOS. There are certain drawbacks, limitation, every test has a limitation, none of the test has 100% sensitivity or specificity. So, the AFC, the limitations of AFC is accurate measurement of AFC requires an experienced sonographer, and it can be limited, usefulness is limited in patient who have pelvic surgery or uterine fibroid or in obese patients. There is moderate inter-observer and inter-cycle variability. So, AFC determination limits its reproducibility. As with basal FSH measurement, the intercycle variability of FSH does not correlate well with IVF outcome. Ovarian volume is another measure which is calculated by measuring each ovary in 3 planes and using the formula for calculating volume of an ellipsoid. Ovarian volume is measured, and then mean of ovarian volume of both the ovaries is taken. Low ovarian volume is a predictor of poor response. It has shown to be a low, but the ovarian volume, it has low positive predictive value and has significant intercycle variability. Thus, ovarian volume also has limited reliability as a marker of ovarian reserve. In a recent publication 2013, because it was observed that among the so many ovarian reserve markers are available, but none of the test has 100% sensitivity or specificity or has very good predictive value. So, they did a meta-analysis of published studies to predict the efficacy of these tests in predicting poor response. They found that female age alone, the area under the curve was shown to be 0.61, whereas when age was combined with AMH, it improved to 0.78, and when age was combined with AFC, it improved to 0.76. So, when AMH and AFS were combined independently with age, it certainly improved the predictive power of the response as compared to the age alone. And when all the markers age, AMH and AFC were combined together, there was a little improvement in AUC, which is 0.80. So, there was no, but this combination did not reach at significant level. There is another approach which has been suggested by Sun et al. published in 2008, they have given a new approach. They have suggested following approach, that it is important that we, because we know that ovarian aging is a ovarian reserve declines with the age, but which female will have the decline earlier, it is not known. The factors are not known, why in some women it declines very early, whereas in some women it declines late. So, it is important, like they suggest that it is not wise to use the same cutoff for AMH or AFC for all the age group. What they suggest, that it is important that the patients are distinguished into two categories, like physiological ovarian aging and premature ovarian insufficiency. They suggest that fertility observed at the age of 30 years can be considered optimal fertility, and they suggest usage of a nomogram, which in their paper they have shown one nomogram in which this the dashed line in figure A, shows the optimal fertility, that is the fertility shown at the age of 30 years, and they say that if the delivery rate per cycle can be calculated, and this red marked area shows physiological aging, whereas if the patient's delivery rate falls in the blue area, it is generally suggestive of premature ovarian insufficiency. They say, like this is a very new approach which they have given, not that is their own like center they are doing this, but they are using this nomogram to differentiate between the two groups of the patient and then tailoring the therapy accordingly. In 2013, NICE also has published its guideline for usage of ovarian reserve marker. They say that women's age should be used as an initial predictor of her overall chance of success through natural conception or with in vitro fertilization. Then you can use one of the following measure to predict the likely ovarian response to gonadotropin stimulation in IVF: total antral follicle count less than or equal to 4 for a low response and greater than 16 for a high response. AMH less than or equal to 5.4 picomole per liter for a low response and greater than equal to 25 picomole per liter for a higher response. FSH greater than 8.9 for a low response and less than 4 for a high response. They strongly recommend that none of the tests mentioned below, they should be used to predict outcome of fertility treatment alone. None of the following tests should be used alone to predict the outcome of fertility: ovarian volume, ovarian blood flow, inhibin B and estradiol. So, to summarize, markers of ovarian reserve, they occupy an important place in initial approach to the treatment of subfertile couples. All tests, they have some benefits, as it is not possible to guarantee the accuracy of a single test for prediction of ovarian reserve. The key to better counseling may reside in the joint analysis of distinct markers of ovarian reserve. Ability of ORT to predict ovarian reserve response exceeds all. It has been shown uniformly in all the studies that these ovarian reserve marker, they are good in predicting response to therapy, but their ability to predict pregnancy is limited. And the best candidate for a single biomarker is AMH, which appears to be representative of the hands of a biological clock, and the predictive value of ORT, if you have to go for a single biomarker, then, and predictive value of in addition, there is a need to to investigate predictive value of ORT in specific infertile population, that is having endometriosis, autoimmune disease and hyperandrogenic anovulation. These are the references, and with this, thank you. Thank you for the patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Mimi. We have few queries. Is there any role of the third day progesterone level in prediction of pregnancy rate?
Third day pregnancy rate, not that I have come across. I have not come across any literature suggesting day 3 progesterone to predict pregnancy rate. Ma'am, can you help?
See, I'm not an IVF specialist, but the prediction of with the progesterone you cannot predict. But once she has conceived, then you do the progesterone levels. Then definitely you definitely have to give a progesterone support if the progesterone levels are low.
How dehydroxytestosterone helps in improving the ovarian reserves?
Dehydroxytestosterone, not that.
Is there any clinical implication of using, like Dr. Sangeeta Jain from Ambala is asking this question, how deoxyhydrotestosterone helps in improving the ovarian reserves? Is there any literature for this or any clinical implications regarding this?
No.
So we don't have any
Not that
clinical,
we are,
okay, there is no
clinically-
clinical relevance of this
Yes.
hormone as per
Yeah.
se. Okay. If a patient has a low AMH, how DHEA helps in improving the pregnancy rates?
See, DHA, role of DHA in improving pregnancy rate, I need to find out because this is like,
Ma'am, if you
need
could
to
help
find
us.
DHEA is also being used in the postmenopausal ladies also, and this is used in the Western world across the counter as a not as a drug, but as a nutrition supplement. So I don't know because I'm not an IVF
because
specialist.
DHA having any role.
Being used in the cases in which AMH is low.
Low.
It is being used, you give it for 3 months, it increases the fertility rate, but how I do?
No, see, no, this is like your.
DHEA is being used.
No, see, but this is that.
IVF etc. they are using it.
But this
So
is
DHA
that this
is
is a
being used.
this is a supplement. This is not in pregnancy. This is a supplement. Actually, in postmenopausal ladies, it is being used very much. And when they talk about in postmenopause, I'm not talking about the infertile couples.
Androgens also, ma'am, we are using it. The combination, the name is OVARES, OVARES. And this is being given for 3 to 4 months. IBD dosage.
Prior to conception.
And then you find that they
But-
do conceive. But not
But DHEA, how does it, because even if androgens are formed, it's because androgen.
So I am telling you, na, and whereas it is being used as a supplement, nutritional supplement. So I don't know how it is acting or what is the basis of for this.
infertility is being used by IVF persons especially. When they find AMH is low.
What is her question?
If the patient has low AMH, how DHEA helps in improving the pregnancy rates?
How,
If a patient has a low AMH, how DHEA is helping to improve the pregnancy rates? How, we do not know, but it is helping. That is what the answer is.
Mechanism वो मुझे पता नहीं.
mechanism, maybe she is doctor.
Dr. Sangeeta Jain, we would revert back to you regarding this.
Yeah, Dr. Sangeeta will revert back to you.
Yeah, regarding the mechanism, basically, we'll revert back to you on this. What is the predictive value of AMH in case of ovarian reserves, basically?
AMH, it is, as I mentioned, the predictive value, it has a good sensitivity and it has a predictive value of as high as 80% but it is age related. We have to see that the AMH values when we are seeing, as I mentioned, that the predictive value, it depends upon the prevalence. So, AMH value, it may have very good sensitivity, but if the prevalence is low, as in young patient, the predictive value is low, whereas the predictive value is high when the prevalence is high, as in older age. So, the predictive value will vary along with the prevalence.
Does AMH testing has significance in PCOD detection?
Yes, there are wide number of literatures which states that AMH level, because we know that PCOS is what, there is number of small follicles which starts maturing, but none of them they reaches dominant follicle. So, there are large number of follicles which are which starts growing, which are secreting AMH, and that is why level of AMH is high in PCOS. So, high AMH level has been found in PCOS patient. So, it correlates, rather the PCOS level has been correlated with the insulin sensitivity also. It is said that higher the level of AMH, it suggests the severity of PCOS.
On which days of the cycle should AMH test be best suited?
As already mentioned, it is independent of cycle, so it can be measured on any day of the menstrual cycle.
Is there any correlation in FSH, LH and AMH values in detecting the ovarian reserves?
See, the correlation between FSH and AMH, with LH, no, though there are not many studies, but FSH and AMH has been studied as independent marker of ovarian reserve. As I mentioned that AMH, if you have to choose between the AMH and FSH, AMH is a better marker because AMH declines continuously throughout the reproductive age group, whereas FSH it starts increasing in a very late age. Like the patient, by the time you detect a very high level of FSH, there may have been a significant decline in the ovarian reserve. So, FSH is a late marker of ovarian reserve, whereas AMH is a very early marker. Then FSH has cycle to cycle variation. There is a large intercycle variability and intracycle variability, whereas AMH does not vary throughout the cycle. So, AMH certainly has advantage over FSH, whereas LH is not being used as a marker of ovarian reserve.
Okay. Does AMH has any role in male infertility as well?
Yes, it can be used. AMH, because as mentioned, AMH was diagnosed as a male hormone. AMH plays an important role in regression of Mullerian ducts, and it is produced by Sertoli cells. So, AMH plays a role in male infertility investigation also.
Okay. How is HE4-ROMA test helpful in diagnosis of ovarian cancer?
Okay. HE4-ROMA, though it is not related to assisted ART or what we are discussing today, but I would mention that HE4 is a new marker of ovarian cancer which has been introduced recently, and the utility of HE4 over CA125 is that we know that CA125 could be increased in various benign conditions also, like endometriosis is one common condition where CA125 is increased, and second is the CA125 starts increasing only in the stage 2. In very early stage of ovarian cancer, 50% of the patient may not have elevated CA125. And third, there are a group of patients where they are proven cases of ovarian cancer, but still you may not find elevated CA125 level. In these patients, HE4 can be of help, because sometimes you may find HE4 because the pattern of rise of HE4 is similar to CA125, but HE4 is more specific as compared to CA125, and those 10% of the patient where you do not find in a known case of ovarian cancer or elevated CA125, you may have elevated HE4 which can support your diagnosis.
Okay. One question for ma'am. A lady is 7 weeks pregnant and is having a regular exercise 5 days a week workout program, usually yoga and light weight exercises. She is finding a slight bleeding. So should she stop the exercise?
So she should stop the exercise, that is okay, but before that she should find out why that she is bleeding for. So she should have an ultrasound, whether she should find out is a live fetus or not. That is very, very important, because it's not normal to have a bleeding, and any exercise, any vigorous thing should be, she should not go for. Definitely no, I don't know.
Thank you. I would like to thank Dr. Nimi for this elucidative lecture.
Thank you.
And I would also like to thank Dr. Indrani Ganguly for her precious time to come on this platform of Dr. Lal Path Labs and enlightening us on this topic. Thank you. I would also like to thank all the doctors who have participated in this symposium. Dr. Lal Path Labs would continue such endeavors in the future. The webinar will be available on the site www.drlalpathlabswebinar.com from 30th June onwards. Thank you. अभी ये बंद तो कर दो. Can we call upon Dr. Indrani for the bouquet? From Head of Medico Marketing, Mr. Vikas Sharma. Ma'am, please. Can we have Dr. Nimi Kansal from Mr. Dheeraj Joshi? Thank you, everybody. Huh? Writing. Ma'am, everything is there for you. Ma'am, बहुत कुछ है.